This is Your Pain Game podcast, where we talk about the game of living in and with chronic pain and trauma, getting to the heart of how to heal. I am your host, Lyndsay Soprano. On this show, I plan on discussing with doctors, chronic pain patients, holistic practitioners, loved ones, and anybody that is interested in having their voice heard in the chronic pain and trauma world that we live in. So I've always been a bit of an extremist and very intense. Those closest to me might laugh at the sentiment that I'm a bit extreme because I'm actually really a full extremist, and I have been forever. I always do everything to extreme, good, bad, fun, and ugly, and always have. And I know as a young girl and a teenager, I was always a bit dark. I was extremely emotional. I had behavioral issues, and I still have those tendencies. I was pretty dark and I was kind of twisty from a very young age and super rebellious. And after dealing with so many hidden and unspoken traumas that I've been through my life that are just now starting to come to the surface, 40 plus years later, and I'm just now starting to deal with that darkness is starting to share with some time with sunshine now. And not all the time and not every day. And today, in particular, has been kind of a dark and stormy Daniels kind of a day for me. So the fact that I'm smiling and laughing at this time of the day while doing this episode is pretty good considering how my morning started. But where I want to give in and give up to pain, where I want to give into the things that stress me out, the things that make me sad, the things that break my heart, they live with me. And it really affects how I feel and how I react to things and how my emotions take over and how sometimes I feel totally and completely out of control. And as a kid raised in the early 80s, we weren't really taught the skills to manage our behavior. We weren't taught about how to manage our wandering thoughts. We weren't taught about managing our emotions. And I thought that kind of was like, that was something of that age of my ilk. But apparently, it's just not the case. We're all a little emotional. We're all a little out of control. And one of the things that I always did to get out some of my energy was actually extreme sports. One of them was downhill racing and skiing. I was a slalom racer, and I loved going top to bottom as fast as I could, out of control, out of bounds, triple blacks, broken bones, tree trails. A lot of those tree trails ended up having me land in the trees, doing extreme jumps in those trails and missing them and more. And I've always lived a little on the edge. And so has my guest and his dad. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my guest today, Ryan DeLena, and his hot dog dad, Rob DeLena. Hi, guys. Thanks for being here with me.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So Ryan, you're currently a junior in college at Northern Vermont University studying outdoor education. And you're widely known in social media as Extreme Ryan, which I love as a fellow extremist. And I'm not going to shout out all of your accolades of all of the wonderful things that you've done on the slopes until we talk about your story. And you're no visitor to extreme emotions and extreme detrimental methods of behavioral modification as you grew up. So let's talk about it. I'd like to roll out the red carpet for you and start maybe with a little bit of your early childhood and your behavior issues that were occurring that led to these like gnarly methods of mods in your life. And let's go from there.
Yeah. I was just a tricky kid. I like to disobey my parents. I like to do things that were probably, I was just the kind of kid that was going to try and hang from the chandelier. I was going to climb onto the roof of the play set. I was going to try and run around in the woods. Like I was just that kind of kid. And when I was growing up, before I was in school, that wasn't necessarily an issue. And it became an issue once I got to school. So once I'm in preschool, which is still pretty young to really determine how a kid is going to turn out, because a lot of young, crazy kids turn out to be really functional but interesting adults, So, yeah. So when I get to preschool, this stuff that makes me just kind of a fun, quirky kid starts to be an issue for them because I don't want to fall in line with everybody else. I'm not going to sit there and make the macaroni necklace. I would rather try and run around outside, or try and climb up on the table. Like I was not gonna do these like kind of quiet, mellow activities. And I also just didn't learn very well by people talking at me. Like I can't remember a single thing from preschool, kindergarten. Like, it's like the teacher was just like a Charlie Brown character, just like blah, 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 blah. So when I got up, a teacher would walk around with me, and I never thought anything of it. I was too young to even know what was going on. But behind the scenes, they were saying, yeah, this is not going to work out. We don't think he should enter first grade in public school. We think he needs to get moved to a therapeutic school. And that was where I started to actually face the consequences of kind of how I was acting and realize that it wasn't good. So when I was around 5 years old, I moved to my therapeutic school, where they started restraining me when I acted out of line. And this was vastly different from what I was used to, because instead of someone just getting up and walking around with me, and then when I went back to class, they just sat down, all of a sudden they were putting their hands on me, they were slamming me on the floor, they were getting on top of me, covering my mouth if I was yelling. And this was happening at the smallest thing, tearing a piece of paper in half, knocking over a snowman at recess, not wanting to sit in timeout. And it was really detrimental to me because I was just so young, and I was getting taught to be afraid of school, be afraid of conflict at such a young age.
Yeah, you're talking about, I'm thinking in my brain about like preschool, because I was in Montessori school and then I was in kindergarten. I was always the one acting out. I was always the smart ass in the class. I was always the one that was walking around and rambling around and didn't want to conform. I didn't want to make the macaroni necklace. I was cracking up when you said that. I wanted to do my own thing, pave my own way, do my own. I always felt like I was a little bit separate from everybody else. I always felt like I wasn't the same. I wasn't the norm. I was always this different kid. Like I have pictures of me when all the little silly musicals that you do when you're in preschool and kindergarten, and all of the kids are like smiling and singing and doing what they're supposed to be. And I'm the one like sitting there on stage with my legs like open, like in my little dress, or like picking my nose. Like I was the kid that did not want to conform. Did you struggle with conform issues at such a young age? Because I definitely identify with that, because that led down to some stuff with my parents that not necessarily I ended up being restrained like you're talking about, but it certainly was leading me down a different kind of a path.
I don't know if it was necessarily conformity, because I never felt like I needed to go against the status quo for the sake of doing it. I felt like I was the type of kid who I just wanted to be authentic to who I was. And the second I was opposed for being authentic to who I was, then I wanted to go against the status quo. Like if something I identified with was not accepted, then I wanted to make a point of doing it more. It was reactionary. It wasn't necessarily that I felt that it was in my identity to rebel.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I feel like for my side, it was a little bit of both. Okay. So you get to this therapeutic school. Where was this, by the way?
Lexington, Massachusetts.
We live in Sudbury, Mass, and it was a couple of towns away.
Okay. Yeah. So in Massachusetts outside. And so you're talking about in the cold, and, can you get into a little bit about what age you got in there? How long were you in this school? Did you bounce around? What happened?
I was there for about 4 years, when I was 5 to when I was 9. And eventually we just had enough, in part due to our journey with skiing and my dad seeing a different side of me and realizing that I wasn't this kid who they said I was, in part with them just sort of seeing the impact of restraints on me, getting more formally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And we just had enough and told them, like, you got to stop restraining him. And when they were told to not restrain me anymore, they entrenched, because that was within just their methodology. Like a lot of schools, it's a response to a kid who's about to be a threat to somebody else. But for them, it was part of their ideology. They thought that was eventually going to break you. So when that was questioned, they were like, okay, we'll send him home the second there's an issue. And they would purposely pick the smallest thing. At one point, I think he was 10 minutes out of the parking lot when he got a call and was like, you got to bring him home. Like they were definitely trying to just make his life more difficult because they were questioned. And after like the first week and a half of that, he was over it. Like, yeah, we're pulling you out of here.
Yeah. So Dad, I'm gonna jump in with you for a sec, because I know that when it comes to having a child that you don't necessarily know what to do with, and that's not a negative statement. It's like, what the heck? Like, my baby, you know? Can you talk to me a little bit about like what that was like sending Ryan to a therapeutic school, and what was really happening during those couple years that he was there from your perspective?
No, I'm glad you framed it that way, because nobody starts with the expectation they're going to drop their kid off at a school that's going to restrain them. And it wasn't that way for us. I mean, Ryan was a difficult toddler. He was rambunctious, energetic. He was defiant. He was, obstinate, but he was really fun to parent because he was super smart. And I mean, really, before school started, he was the star of the neighborhood. He talked before everybody else. He moved faster than everybody else. And I love that part of him. But my parental expectations were fueled by, generationally. My grandparents were immigrants. My father was blue collar. I became a lawyer. He was going to do better than I did. And we put him into the fanciest private, preschool in the area. And when one of those, you have to put them on the list when you're in the womb. We got him into it. And he was there one day when the director asked to see us and say, there's something about his behavior that's different. We want to have a pediatric neuropsychologist observe him the next day. And all of this happens really quickly. And it's this little series of baby steps where the neurologist observes him. She says that he'd be better off at an integrated preschool that has a mix of kids with issues and without issues. And we think, okay, that sounds plausible. We moved him into the public integrated preschool. He did okay there for a year. He struggled more in the second year. The neurologist then recommended this therapeutic school. Now, the therapeutic school, we went and visited. It was kids that, were somewhat autism spectrum-y, some behavioral, but it was small classes. They had previewing, they had transitions, they had all the things that we thought he would benefit from. The one part we missed is that in their materials, they described their model as a holding environment. Ugh. And they described the holding environment as when a kid is dysregulated, especially a kid who may be nonverbal or maybe can't really, express himself, and gets frustrated, they're going to give this child a hug, hold this child until he calms down. And that was what we were told. So, and we were trained in how to do it at home. We hired a babysitter and how to do it at our house. And so, as it then, over the 4 years, it evolved pretty quick. I mean, right away, I started to question it. And when we would do it at home, I would say, okay, Ryan acted up. He didn't want to go into timeout. I then had to tackle him and sort of struggle in this wrestling thing and hold him, which he tried to squiggle out of and wiggle out of. And we ended up sweating on the floor for a half hour. And then why did I do this again? What was the reason why I started to do this? I don't even remember why you got in trouble to begin with. And so I started to question it. And then when we started, like Ryan alluded to, when we started to question the school, they really didn't have another go-to. All they really had was restraint when a kid acted up. So they didn't have a plan B. And, the problem, and we'll fast forward the story a little bit, once he was in a school that restrained him and where he had a one-to-one aid, no other special needs type school would take him other than schools that restrained. So we were sort of stuck in this system of schools that restrained. We started to briefly look at other schools that were in the area, and they looked worse, if anything. So we had really no option. We thought about homeschooling him. Eventually, when it all fell apart at school number one, I literally just pulled him out one day. I went there to pick him up. I was frustrated. I didn't tell my wife. I said, we quit, and we left. And then I called her and said, we quit, we left. And she said, what are we going to do now? We don't have a school. It was in that period where he was home with nothing to do, where his therapist started to question what was going on at home. And she was the one who advised us to put him in a mental hospital for 2 weeks while they messed around with his medication to see if they could stabilize him. She really alluded to the fact that he might hurt himself or hurt his sister, which, I didn't think would happen. But when you hear those things as a parent, you think, I don't want to be wrong about this. So maybe we should go to the mental hospital for 2 weeks. Again, terrible mistake. Wish I never did it. The second worst thing I ever did, other than sending to a school that restrained him. So it's a long story. A lot of this happens quickly, but a series of baby steps. And one day you wake up and your kid is 9 or 10 years old and is completely dysregulated, has PTSD, has lost all trust in adults, thinks every interaction he has that it's going to end in conflict is going to end with him face down on the floor. That's where the story, luckily skiing comes into the picture around this time, but I'll let Ryan pick it up.
Well, I'm actually going to pick it up from there, because I have a question in relation to the type of restraint. when you're talking about dysregulation, you're talking about restraint. To me, I want to go dark and twisty on the restraint side of things. But can you tell me a little bit in regards to what are the things that were happening to you in this type of therapeutic setting? Because therapy is such a broad word, as we've come to find out.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times what would happen is it would just kind of start with a small issue, and then it would lead to a bigger issue, and then that would ultimately lead to a restraint. Sometimes you didn't even need to get to the bigger issue, but usually it involved you kind of face down on the floor with an adult on top of you, and they have your arms and legs secured somehow. And then this can happen in the middle of a classroom. It can happen in front of all your friends. It can happen like in any room of the building, outside, on the ground, hot out, cold out, raining out, it doesn't matter. And if you're screaming and you're disrupting the class, then they'll cover your mouth so the kids can't hear you, as if it's not still disrupting them somehow. And then it can feel like you can't breathe. You already have a whole person on top of you and your mouth's covered. There's not a lot of airflow. So that makes you panic and struggle more, which makes them go harder. And a lot of times the issue is that it wasn't like they were just trying to handle the situation. A lot of times the adrenaline kicks in and they wanted to win that fight. Like you could tell the more you struggled, the more it made them want to win that fight. They almost got mad at you and put more force into it. So I would have bruises, rug burns, whatever. And I would come home and be like, Dad, they tried to kill me. And, he's thinking I'm exaggerating, I'm lying. I'm like any other kid who just doesn't want to go to school and is going to make up a story for why I don't have to go to school. And it wasn't like that. I was really in fear. And it gets more challenging as I get bigger. Because when I'm 5, it's not like I can fight back very much. As I start to grow, as I start to be, 9 years old, suddenly I can put up a little bit of a fight. And this turns from a 5-minute conflict to a 30-minute conflict. Even when I was in high school, this still happens sometimes. And now I'm starting to actually, go through puberty, and I'm having, I'm getting muscle tone. Like these can be really physical, long drawn out conflicts that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like I'm watching CNN and watching the Memphis police like completely annihilate a kid that's helpless. I'm mind boggled by listening to this from so many different places. And you mentioned earlier, actually, both of you mentioned earlier about PTSD and that you're struggling with it, which I would not doubt that you would be. Are you dealing with that on a day-to-day basis right now? Or is that something, how are you dealing with that PTSD? Because I understand it from my perspective and the traumas that happened to me in my life. And I know that they pop up like, whoop, like randomly, like, oh, wow, that just popped out of nowhere. Great. Thank you. Are you struggling with that today?
It evolves. And I was very lucky in that my trauma was very specific to one place. So, one of the things I describe in the book is like when I got back to public high school when I was a junior, and I was finally in an environment where they didn't do restraints. Like it was the normal line of events where if you acted up, you would, maybe get detention, or you would just get a talking to if it wasn't that bad, or if it was really bad, maybe you got suspended, which like, it's not like I wanted those things. And it's not like that happened to me very much. But just knowing all of the sudden that nobody was going to attack me if there was an issue, I relaxed so much. Like, people thought I was like some stoner kid, like, cause I just gave off this relaxation vibe for that like first month. And it was just, I just let go of all of this tension. And at that point, I'd kind of just assumed I was fine. I'm like, oh, cool. So I don't have this thing anymore. Like I can just ignore it. But while I may not have been immediately afraid of that conflict resulting in a restraint anymore, I still, like when I have arguments with people, I get intense sometimes because it's almost like a little reflex. Like when somebody yells at me, it's my natural instinct to yell back. It's almost like how you'd fight a bear. Like if you have a bear that is approaching you, you want to throw rocks in the air to make yourself look bigger. Like I want to raise my voice to make myself seem bigger, And it's not that I'm even conscious of that. It's that my body reflexively, when I sense conflict, puts up that defense mechanism. And for a while, and I've gotten better at this, a lot of the trauma wasn't even just from the physical side of things, but the mental side of things, of just for years and years and years being like, okay, you're getting moved to a different school, but we promise this one will be better. And then I get there and it's the same shit, or it's worse, or there's less opportunity. And I developed this really fatalistic outlook that, like, whenever things were going wrong, it was my natural inclination to think it's just going to go wrong forever. Like, there's no such thing as a good ending. And as I've gotten more positivity in my life and I've taught myself to think more positively, a lot through outdoor sports, I've changed that a lot. And I would say this went from happening, every day to maybe once a year, once every 2 years. But, you can tell the body holds on to that stuff. It's like, it's in there. It doesn't come out the same way, not as violently, not as scary, but it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, there's a book that I want you to read if you haven't read it. It's called The Body Keeps the Score.
I've heard of that.
It really aligns with what you're talking about, that your body holds on to stuff and we don't know where it's going to hold on to. Like for me, the stuff that happened to me when, when I was a little girl and early in my adulthood in college and so on and so forth. And Ryan, you didn't get to meet me, but I'm in a wheelchair for 50% of my life now. And I believe wholeheartedly that 50 to 75% of it is all trauma that is stuck in my body. And it's the reason why I started this show, because I was absolutely desperate to find people that have been through trauma, that are healers, that are people that are vulnerable like you, that can talk and be open about it. And you're so awesome. I'm not going to use the word brave because people use it all the time. You're awesome in that you're talking about it at such a young age, because if you don't and you wait until you're old, it's been sitting in there longer, keeping score. And so I'm proud of you for being the man that you've become throughout all of your trials and tribulations and what you've been through to be such a badass that you are right now. And I want to move into the extreme sports side of it, into the skiing side. And there's a book that these two put together. The book's written in two voices. It's called Without Restraint. It's a joint father-son memoir that basically talks about struggle and strength and adventure and heart and misunderstandings of poor mom and dad not knowing what to do and poor son not knowing what to do. And now together, this unbreakable bond that you guys have created throughout this journey and this adventure together. So this book's called Without Restraint, How Skiing Saved My Son's Life. And I want you to talk a little bit about how you got into skiing and what its role has played in your healing through a lot of everything that you've been through. For both of you, I'd like to start with Ryan.
It's interesting that you led up to it this way, because I remember they had me, they as in mom and dad, they had me read my first 3 chapters that I wrote aloud just to see what I was working on. And I remember the first time I read it, my body started shaking for like no reason. And it was just because I hadn't even talked about this more than twice since it had happened. Like the last 12 years of just what had been going on. I had never spoken about it. And now that I've done a lot of these podcasts and explained this book a million times and have talked about it maybe 1,000 times, it doesn't feel that way anymore. And I think that it's been cathartic to write it, which has been really a positive side effect of putting this really personal thing out there, is that I've maybe done some healing and processing just by going through this book.
Well, yeah, I mean, talking and being vulnerable and being organic about it, and not like, my whole thing is no filter. And because filtering is terrible outside of like your drinking water. I don't want any filters, because if there's one person that we can touch today with our episode together, then there's one person that we've touched. And the vulnerability and the filtering of that, like, you've got to just be you and share your story and be out there, because the other option is not. And you're not helping anybody by doing nothing, So I applaud you for being here with that. What are your thoughts about this, Dad?
So I think it's interesting, to hear the first skiing story. Let me set the scene a little bit. I'd only skied a little bit as a kid. I hadn't skied in 25 years. It wasn't like it was part of our daily conversations. Ryan had never skied. I just had this fully traumatized kid who was home for Christmas break when he was 7 years old. whenever he would get into a conflict with his sister, my wife and I would divide them. I would take Ryan in the car. We would go to Home Depot. We'd walk around Home Depot. He would make me buy some giant wrench that I would never use. And we would fight about why I didn't need a $70 wrench. And so for whatever reason, I just had filed skiing away maybe as a possibility. And he gets in a fight with his sister. I throw him in the car. I stick his bicycle helmet on him, his gloves and a coat. And I said, you want to try skiing? We drive 45 minutes to this little local hill. The whole time I'm thinking this is never going to work. He's never going to get through the rental process. He couldn't wait for anything. He was, he just was so impulsive. And somehow we make it through the rental process and we get on the magic carpet and the magic carpet's like this airport people mover that goes up a little bunny hill. And we get to the top of that. And all of a sudden it hits me like, I haven't told him anything about how to ski or what to do. And I don't even remember what to tell him, but I stop him for a second and I say, Ryan, this is how you snowplow and this is how you turn. And I even fell down in the snow. And I said, if you fall, this is kind of how you use the leverage to get up. And he just looked at me and he shot straight down the bottom of the bunny hill. And then he made this big turn back to the magic carpet. And I looked at him. I was like, I don't know how he knew how to do that. Like, I don't even know how to do that. So, we ended up, reconnected and we did it a few times. We went up the lift and, it wasn't a perfect day, but I remember driving home and thinking that wasn't terrible. Like that was better than really anything we'd done. And it was just this glimmer of, I took this kid who was traumatized and I put him in an environment where I couldn't restrain him, where there wasn't any teacher that was going to restrain him. There really weren't a lot of rules, where risk was rewarded, where it was free and he was free to express himself. And he just looked a little different. And so we went back the next day and I got him an instructor and she took him to the top of the mountain and he did the Black Diamond run on this like second hour of skiing, which was incredible. And then the next week we went to a bigger Massachusetts mountain. And the next week we went to a New Hampshire mountain. And then we went to Vermont and he did a double Black Diamond and we ended up in Vail that year. And it just, all of a sudden we had this thing that he loved. And I had to kind of like because he got so good so fast. I had to kind of
and now I ski.
And now I ski, so it's become my hobby. And it just, I don't know, we had this little moment of that winter where he was just a different kid. And then unfortunately, I had to drop him back off at school on Mondays and he'd have to go back through the same thing again. And it was really all of a sudden his life was I described in the book as parallel tracks. He had this really positive experience away from school on the mountain, and you still had this really awful school experience. But what it did was it changed our outlook at home. Like that was what convinced me. No more restraints at home. We wouldn't let the babysitter restrain him at home. And then that was when we really started to fight the school. And I can't say it was perfect. And you read it in the book. I mean, there was still a lot of trauma he went through. It wasn't as simple as snapping my fingers and getting him back in public school. It took 10 years. It took 3 other schools. Each one was progressively a little better, but really wasn't great. And
it was kind of like better, worse, a little better, best, that was sort of how it went.
Yeah, for sure. But we embark on this journey over 10 years to really ski the planet. And that's a big part of the book too. We just went to some really interesting, crazy places.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have been all over the place. And I know that there's outlets, right? I mean, a lot of people, when it comes to dealing with, I don't even care what age you are, we have to have an outlet. We have to go do something. We have to get rid of this negative, whatever, our stresses, our life, or this or that. Shit happens to everybody every single day, and we have to figure out a way to get through it, damn it. And so when you have an outlet like skiing and outdoors specifically, because when you get out in nature and you look at our world and how grateful we all need to be for what's around us and the beauty and the quiet and the peace. And I don't know if you identify that with that, Ryan. I know with me with skiing, like, oh my God, I can hear just the sound of my skis in the snow. I can hear when I'm going through trees and snow's falling down onto the ground below. Like I hear the bombs in the background for avalanches. Like I loved that peace and that quiet and that stillness that came with it. Even though I was moving fast, even though I was being extreme, even though I was going out of bounds and breaking all of the rules and getting my lift, my passes pulled from me because I was jumping off of chairlifts. I loved that peace and that silence. And I wonder if some of that had something to do with that with you.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on with outdoor sports. And I think there's sort of 2 things. One, humans were meant to be in nature. I really think that a lot of the anxiety and the depression in the world is just the brain so confused as to the environment it's in, because it's light out, but you're not feeling sunlight when you turn a fluorescent light on. It's winter and you have the hours of daylight, but it's 70 degrees in your house. Like some part of you has to be really fucking confused about what is going on. And just going outside is connecting with your ancestral roots in a way. Like we were meant to be outside and live off the land. And I think it's easier to connect with that with hiking, backpacking, places where you can get a little deeper into nature. Sometimes skiing, if you're out on a crowded Saturday at the resort, can be a little bit like going to Disney World,
Yeah,
but
I agree.
just the fresh air, the cold, like crispness of it, the sunlight, that's important. Skiing in the woods is great. When you were talking about it, it literally just brought me to this image in my mind of this run called Mike's Way at Loon Mountain, where it's a hemlock forest and it's super tall and the branches, block out the sunlight, and it's just so peaceful in there. I've always loved that run. I think the other thing with outdoor sports that is really cool is just realizing your human capabilities. When you have an individual sport where you can put effort in and that effort results in progress, all of a sudden you start to realize that it's all in your hands. Anything in your life, if you put enough effort into it, you can get to where you want to be. And then you look back over that journey of, things maybe 10 years ago you dreamed about, and now they're easy for you. They're just things you do on a usual weekend. And having that perspective really helps me out. So that's what I think the benefits of skiing are. I think that's important.
So what are you doing? Like, go forward. What's your go forward plan? I want your 20-year plan placed in front of me right now. No, what are you doing from a skiing perspective and from talking about the book and talking about your journey? I know you're still young, and I don't want to throw that in your face, but you are still young, so you're lucky. But I am too, and so is your dad. None of us are dead on this call, but no, what do you want to do when it comes to skiing? Are you wanting to just like take this? Are you wanting to be in the Olympics? Like, what do you want to do with all of this? Because you're a pretty remarkable kid, dude. I'm not going to lie.
I never liked the competitive side of skiing. I want to stay individual, but I love having challenges that force me to adventure and take a really long time to chip away at. And even if I don't finish them, like I'm always somebody that loves to have something to chip away at, something to work towards. It just kind of keeps the fire burning. So right now, I ski tour in the presidential range of New Hampshire, which if you're not from here, you look at the elevations on the mountains and you think they're probably pretty small, but we have a pretty fickle mountain range here. The terrain is all very steep. You're frequently skiing in 40, 50-degree terrain. You're frequently skiing on kind of wind-affected, wind-packed snow. There's a lot of ice that flows just because of the water in the system. And we just came out with a guidebook. There was this dude, Kurt Nealer, who wrote a guidebook called Presidential Skiing. So I've been trying to ski every single line in the book. And part of what makes that a unique challenge is that it's not a highlight book. It's not the 50 best ski descents of New England. It's a guidebook. There's literally things in there that say not recommended on there. It's just a list of everything that exists. So it's the first of its kind of challenge. As far as I've heard, nobody's done them all yet. And it's fun because a lot of these lines, some of them have 60-foot ice cliffs in them, and you need to bring a rope and rappel off of a cliff with skiing above it and skiing below it. Some of them are incredibly rare, and there's some that face in the direction of the predominant wind, so the wind just strips all the snow off of it. And then you'll get a storm one day with no wind, or wind that's blowing the opposite direction for some reason, and it'll fill it in. And you just have to drop everything and put yourself there and go ski that line. Like, it doesn't matter if it's like a Thursday and you have 3 classes and you're like in a different state, like it's go time. So it's a very hard challenge, but it just gets me so fired up because every time you get another piece at it, you're like, whoa, I'm getting good at this. I'm getting to be a wizard of these weather windows. So,
Oh my God, I love it, Dad.
He inspires me too. Sometimes not by choice, but I've been inspired and I've been forced. Sometimes in life you're forced outside your comfort zone. And as a skier, I was mediocre at best for a long time, and I was in way over my head. And then even when I got pretty good, I was doing things that required you to be really good, and that's good. It's a good feeling to be a little scared. And even it happened to me we were just in Montana, and this is a run called Big Couloir, which is a really tough run. You need to sign out, you need avalanche, gear. And I had done it a few times. And we jumped into it the first round of the trip with a guide called Ben Brousseau. And Ben is a huge part of the book. He was the first guy who really believed in Ryan. He took Ryan down Big Couloir when Ryan was 12 years old. And then he took him down this other run called Little Couloir that almost nobody can do. And he took Ryan down it when he was 16 years old. And Ryan, his relationship with Ben as a mentor-mentee is a really instrumental part of the book. But Ben's become a friend, to both of us. And we're in Big Couloir and it's flat light and the conditions are really tough. And I get in about a third of the way in and I kind of stopped and Ben was behind me and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, I'm a little afraid. Like, this is scary. And he just kind of looked at me and said, "Okay, what are you going to do about it? I mean, you really don't have a choice."
Yeah, you're right here. I know. I've been in those spots where I'm like, okay, I'm like, my little ego hops and I'm like, boop, drop down and in. And I'm like, wow, Lyndsay, that was not the best plan.
Yeah, I know.
Now what are we going to do? Yeah. And it's like accepting challenges. It's getting through obstacles. It's figuring it out. It's popping out of your bindings and carrying your skis down because you're like, I'm going to die if I don't. Like, yeah.
I've had those moments for sure. But in the end, when you get to the bottom, you think, all right, I wasn't pretty and I wish I'd skied it better, but I did it. And I think, I learned a lot of that from Ryan because Ryan just, he never quit, in school or in life or, it's certainly not on a ski slope, and there are times when I would watch him ski and it's like, God, it just seems so natural and so easy for him. But, some of the stuff he's done takes incredible courage and it's not easy. There's nothing easy. And don't forget, a lot of what Ryan does in the backcountry, you got to get up the mountain, not just ski down the mountain.
No kidding.
So he's,
oh, yeah, that was the part I didn't mention.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it. And that's what I like the least, but I have learned to embrace it a little bit. I was much better on the second Antarctica trip. I got in shape for it. And part of going up can be fun if you're enjoying it and you're having a few laughs. And, it's a perverse, way of looking at skiing because you go up for hours and hours and hours and you ski down for minutes and minutes and minutes. But, in the end, it's all worth it. You can have that moment at the top when you're looking down and think, I got up here on my own. And, oh, by the way, isn't this the most beautiful fucking thing you've ever seen in your life? And
exactly. I think backcountry skiing really, it brings out the best in the skier. I think you can make it through a whole life of resort skiing and have it not change you very much. I think you can do pretty minimal backcountry. You don't have to try very hard. And you're going to figure out who you really are out there. You're going to figure out your strengths and weaknesses, and it's going to teach you a lot. And, that's the tricky thing. When you're walking up, you have a lot of time in your head. There's a lot of, wow, this is really hard. Wow, I don't know if I can do this. And you got to confront those voices and acknowledge them and try and figure out how to work with them and try and convince yourself you can. And, the backcountry game, it can just be so tricky. There's sometimes the conditions just aren't what they are, or that's probably wrong. They aren't what you want them to be. And you have to acknowledge what they are and be like, this is not the day. We got to bail on this. We're not going to ski this line and we're going to have to do this whole approach with bushwhacking and river crossings and misery all over again and maybe get turned around again if we really want to do this. How many times is it going to take? And then one day it does come together and you learn that optimism from that. Like, okay, like, yeah, we did fail on this, but the next time we got it. Or, wow, I really didn't think I was going to be able to climb that, but I did. And you learn that patience, you learn to value it more. So, he looks at me like, why would I do that to ski for 20 seconds? And it's like, because that 20 seconds is a well-earned 20 seconds. You really feel like you deserve that 20 seconds when you get it.
I love that so much, especially for this show, the Pain Game podcast. And I was very specific and deliberate in the word game when I played the pain game, because pain is not physical pain on this show. I mean, it has something to do with it, but it has something to do with trauma. It has something to do with past regret. It has something to do with obstacles that we have to face. All these things in life. And I love your visual about climbing up there and all the obstacles that you have to put through. And you get there and you're like, yeah, great. Now I did all of this and I have to turn back again. As a chronic pain patient and somebody that deals with it on a minute by minute basis, I am doing that exact same thing. And then I wake up like mornings like yesterday where I was like, I'm not going to be able to make it to the summit. This is as far as I can go. And I had to be okay with that. And I can't guarantee that every time I'm going to be okay with it because it hurts. It's like, oh my God, I can do that. I can do it. I've proven it to myself time and time again that I can do it. Today, I just can't. And we have to give ourselves grace. And I'm using that more in my show because I think that giving ourselves grace and giving ourselves the opportunity to fail, even when we succeed, because that is such a huge part of getting through pain and trauma, is wake up another day, get out there, get on the slopes again, guys, get out there. If you can only go halfway, you did halfway. It's better than no way.
And it doesn't mean that every single time you're going to only get to go halfway
That's
from
right.
now on.
Yeah.
That's just what it was.
That's right. Absolutely. And I love you. I wish I was close to you so I could hug you and smooch you. So when it comes to your next steps in life, what do you have going on? You've got your junior in college. So what are you doing after this?
Getting into the guide world, really, I've realized one of the biggest helps to me when I got into this, when I realized that I wanted to start climbing mountains and skiing them, I went up to the White Mountains, which is just such an inspiring place because you can see almost everything from the road. And you can see things that are only done by the best climbers and skiers in the world just by driving by. So it's a very inspiring place to go see. And I knew nothing and I had no partners. And I just went there and I just started trying. And I was able to get some things done, but not very efficiently, not often very safely. And there were some really key people, people who were guides and climbers and skiers who have stepped in and showed me things and helped me gain progress. And these are people who have so much knowledge that you spend one day with them. And then for the next year, you climb better, you ski better, you approach these things better. So I realized, you can do a lot of impact by being a mentor for somebody or showing them the way. So that's kind of why I want to get into mountain guiding, take people rock climbing, take them skiing and teach them skills to do these things they want to do. And sometimes that means you're hired to take them on the thing they want to do. Or sometimes it means you're teaching them skills so they can go do it on their own. But either way, you're giving people the tools for their dreams. So that takes a lot of training. It's almost going through medical school, except mountain version, trying to do the AMGA stuff. So it can bog me down sometimes how hard it is to do this stuff. Sometimes I'm pulling my hair out, wondering why the hell I'm actually doing this.
Yeah, I understand that. I remember that. Why the hell am I doing any of this? Just let me do what I want to do. Believe it or not, it ends up coming back and it ends up being worthwhile.
Yeah.
In most places, it actually does. I hate to say it, but it's true. So I know that we're clipping up here on time. So Dad, I want to ask you how you're feeling right now about your boy, because I am pretty stoked on him.
No, he's the best. I mean, Ryan has been an inspiration, not just to me, but to so many people. And the courage that he displayed in writing this book. And when I presented the idea to him to write this book, I mean, Ryan had to disclose to everybody that he was on 2 antipsychotics and several antidepressants, spent 2 weeks in a mental hospital, therapeutic schools, and all this stuff. And he could have let all this go. I mean, once he got to college, nobody would have known any of this happened. He would have moved on with his life pretty quickly and easily. And at the point where he was free of all this, it would just been part of his past. But in writing the book, we all, I always thought, and I think he came to realize there were people out there that we could help. And there were parents that were going to make similar mistakes to the ones we made, and hope to God, maybe we can head that off. But also there are kids out there, not just kids with the issues, special needs on the autism spectrum, with mental health issues. Everybody wants to be accepted. I mean, in this world right now, there's so many kids who feel alone and isolated and feel different and they don't fit in. And Ryan was all of those things. And in this book, you will live all of that through his eyes and say, somehow he made it. And maybe it's the healing power of nature. Maybe it was just a belief in himself, but he found a passion. He found himself in a situation where he could be happy, and he carried that over into his everyday life. And it affected me. I mean, I didn't have any of these issues. I was just a lazy dad sitting on the couch, and all of a sudden I got to get forced up that mountain too. And I learned the hard way that, when you look at the top and say it's 2,000 steps at the top, I'm never going to make it. I learned it. It took me years to look and say, I know I can't do those 2,000 steps, but I can do one step. 2,000 times. And I just do the one step and the one step and the one step. And all of a sudden you're at the top. And I think he's such an inspiration. And I think whether he knows it or not, he has a big influence on not just people in his own generation, but even the grownups, I think, that have read the book. And I've gotten so many texts and emails, and I don't even tell them about half of them, but people are just blown away by what he went through, what he accomplished, and the person he is today. He's a great writer. He's a great blogger. If you've read any of his stuff or you see him on video, he's incredibly honest. Everything he does comes right from the heart. It's different than a lot of what you see out there. A lot of what we do on Facebook and Instagram, and we send this little snapshot of our life after we take 7,000 pictures to make it perfect, and we don't really see what goes on behind closed doors. Ryan gives it to y'all, and I think that's pretty special.
Well, and I think that that's a huge part of building any brand, if you will, is to be real and raw and not be, the Kardashians. Even though they are raw and real, which is gross when you think about it, because that's their reality. Well, thank you guys for being here so much. I want to applaud both of you guys. And I fell in love with your dad instantly. And then you, my God, I just want to I want to hang out with you guys big time. And I love the name of your book, Without Restraints. Wow, it is a powerful title. How Skiing Saved My Son's Life. You can get it on Amazon. Like I mentioned, it's written in two different voices with the two of these characters about the struggle of strength and adventure and heart and the things that we talked about today. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave your listeners with, or our listeners with today, Ryan?
Oh man, I never have a closing, I swear. But yeah, hope you all find the book and read it and enjoy it. But you can find me on Instagram, extreme_Ryan_DeLena. My stories are what I do on a daily basis. I'm on YouTube too as just Ryan DeLena. I do narrative style edits where you see like a 15-minute story of what it took to do a certain adventure, the good, the bad, the ugly. Feel free to reach out to me. I usually answer my direct messages within a couple days and I reply to everybody. I'd love to connect with all of my listeners and people who are into this story.
Thank you guys both for being here and for being troopers. I mean, we guys got through it, and we're always going to be going through stuff, guys. That's what life is all about. We do play this pain game. We do play this uphill, downhill slalom course with ourselves throughout our lives. And it's nice to have young guys that are on here like yourself, Ryan, that can give a little bit of hope to people that are younger, because a lot of us get jaded and we get old and we're like, meh. And it is a reminder of our youth and how we still have it in us, right, Rob? We still got it.
I thought you were including me with the young guys. When you said guys,
okay, yeah, you too. I mean, we're not. You and I both aren't totally old. I know.
Right? We look great for our age.
We do. We're holding.
For those of you who can't see us on video, take our word for it.
Yes, we're all three absolutely beautiful people here today. Thanks again, guys, for being here. I really appreciate your time with us.
Appreciate it. That was fun.
You are exclusively invited to share this cathartic, extreme VIP pain journey together. Let's get to the heart of how to heal with you by my side. Do you know someone who is living in and with chronic pain or has a similar story to Ryan and Rob's? If you do, send them our way here to the Pain Game Podcast. I would love to connect with them and hear your heartfelt stories of strength and wisdom and awesomeness. Please follow the Pain Game Podcast wherever you digest your podcast content. We will be there. And before you jam, please be sure to leave the show a review and rating on Apple and Spotify. It really does help us grow. Whether you believe it or not, it does. Visit us at thepaingamepodcast.com and follow us on all the socials. Thanks for listening, my little VIPs. Catch you on the other side.